Hello and welcome to another edition of Invest and You, a program brought to you by the Invest Dominica Authority. I'm your host, Pearl Fontaine Butler. Thank you for joining us. In today's program, we'll focus on the synergies between the Invest Dominica Authority and the Customs and Excise Division. Our guests today are Patrickson Victor, Investor Services Officer at the Invest Dominica Authority, and Louis Copel, Officer in charge of the Fiscal Incentives Unit at the Customs and Excise Division. Thank you both for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll begin with you, Mr. Victor. What is the mandate of the IDA? What's their role in particular?
Okay, let me say hello, Pearl, and thanks for having me. Yeah. And also to our viewers, thanks for tuning in. First of all, Invest Dominica Authority is a statutory body under the Ministry of Planning, Economic Development and Investment, headed by the Honorable Dr. Colin McIntyre. As a statutory body, we have the mandate to actively facilitate and promote investment in Dominica, with vision being to make Dominica the preferred investment destination. And at IDA, one of our main objectives is to ensure that we create a one-stop shop kind of environment for potential investors and even investors alike, to provide them with the necessary services, the necessary linkages, data, to facilitate the setup, operation, and continuity of the enterprise.
And Mr. Copel, what would you say the role and responsibility of the Customs Department is?
The Customs and Excise Division is governed under the Ministry of Finance, and the primary responsibilities are the collection of revenue, the protection of revenue, the facilitation of trade, protecting our society through border control, and the provision of statistics or trade data to any entity or government department which requests such information.
Okay. Can you explain what the Fiscal Incentive Unit is and what the responsibilities of the unit are?
The Fiscal Incentive Unit is the section which is tasked with the administering of the duty-free concessions. These include the waiver of the import duty, then the excise tax and the VAT, the value-added tax, if the concession so desires. And basically our legal basis for this is primarily in the Customs Act 20 of 2010, the Fiscal Incentive Act, Chapter 8451. Also we have the VAT, the value-added tax of Act 7 of 2005. We have the Income Tax Act and the Hotel Aid Act, and any other enactment which is proviso which so provide us with the authority to control the importation or exportation of goods.
Can you explain the difference between duty-free exemptions, the excise tax, and the value-added tax?
The duty-free, I should say the import duty, is the only duty which the Customs Department is authorized to collect. The other taxes, which is the Excise Tax Act and the Value-Added Tax Act, these are under the Inland Revenue Division. So we are providing agency duties when we collect these taxes. That's why I said that the concession, if it will provide for the suspension of these, which would have to be authorized by either the VAT unit or the Ministry of Finance.
Okay, very well. What are the critical things people should know before dealing with customs?
The critical things. These are certain, how should I say it? There are certain things in place. For example, the people should know that prior to coming to the Customs Division, they should have in their possession the official communication letter or document from the ministry, which will indicate that the waiver of the import duty or taxes prior to coming to the Customs Division. Next thing is that they need to have the documentation processed through Asecutor World by an authorized customs broker. And it's also that it is not something which is quite automatic, because customs, the officers who are tasked with the functions, they have to review the documentation to ensure that the custom procedure codes which are utilized are correct. And after that, you go through the process of releasing the items.
Okay. People tend to dislike, obviously, dealing with customs. What can you tell them to help facilitate their interaction with the customs department, aside from coming prepared?
Majority of the trading public, upon the coming to customs, are of the opinion that immediately upon arrival that they are supposed to just receive the items. But the officers have to perform the due diligence checks prior to granting that service. So the most I can say is that the people need to be patient, they need to be courteous, and they need to be calm. And
I have a question referring to something that you said just a little while ago in terms of the import duty, the concession on import duty. I think some people are of the view that once or if they're eligible for it, that means that they pay nothing. Is there a percentage with regards to import duties?
the import duty is governed under the common external tariff, where every item that is being imported is classified and there is an applicable rate of duty affixed to that item. So these are the taxes which are suspended or waived when the concession is approved.
But it doesn't mean that you don't pay anything.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Mr. Victor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with Mr. Coppell, because that question you've just asked, it's important. And that is where IDA plays a role also, because it is important that we share the information to the client and let them understand. And people have the misconception that they don't pay anything at the ports. The fiscal incentives essentially gives you a waiver, if approved, from the payment of import duty and value-added tax. Value-added tax is waived up to the commencement of operations. Once the person would have commenced economic activity, then that benefit cuts off. However, the exemption on payment of import duty continues for a period of time. The license is granted for a period of time, which is dependent on the investment level and the requirement of the business. However, there are other taxes like the excise environmental levy that Invest Dominica Authority under the law does not have the mandate to waive those. And as such, the client is expected to pay those at the port of entry.
But is there some facilitation by the IDA in terms of getting the paperwork for your investors and that sort of thing?
In terms of customs?
Yeah.
Well, this is why customs is here, because the synergy between customs and Invest Dominica is important. And we appreciate some of the frustrations that you alluded to on the part of the client. And what we try to do is ensure that the paperwork is sent to the fiscal incentive unit on time, where the client is having difficulty interacting, whether with a broker or a shipping agency, or they are not clear. And many of the times we have clients not understanding the request being made by the fiscal incentive unit because of the jargon. And it may be a minute or something very small that we can deal with from our end and the client is. And you know, when people are pressed to clear the items and so on, they feel that added stress.
Right.
And Invest Dominica Authority, what we do is liaise directly, because we have that rapport and we are able to facilitate the client. So yes, we support that.
Very well.
And finally, just to also say that people need to acquaint themselves with the terms of the concession granted, and also that they should be cognizant of the fact that they do not have the authority when it comes to the end use or the disposal of the goods without the consent of the Comptroller of Customs. We've been having this little hiccup, and we just need to let the public understand.
But what does that mean in terms of the disposal of goods? What does that mean?
It means that when the concession is received or the duties are waived, after a time period dependent on the concession, you are given the opportunity to dispose of the goods without the payment of the taxes which were waived. but you cannot do so without the consent of the Comptroller of Customs. For example, you have a duty-free vehicle. For it to be able to transfer it at the Inland Revenue Division, if the concession makes provision, you apply to the Comptroller of Customs for permission. When the permission is granted, it will allow the Inland Revenue to unflag the vehicle to allow the transfer of ownership.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Mr. Victor?
Yeah, I just wanted to add also to that point, which is very important, because the Hotel Aid Act and the Fiscal Incentive Act makes provision for persons not to dispose or sell the items even during a particular period. And I think the Hotel Aid Act indicates that 3 years after the expiration of the license, you are not supposed to dispose without written authorization, and the Fiscal Incentive Act gives provision for 5 years. I think this is done in an effort to ensure that the state receives the full benefit from the granting of the concessions in its utilization in the enterprise.
So for those people who are listening, I think it's important to differentiate or to explain the word dispose in this sense, meaning to sell or to transfer the property or ownership.
Right, and we may even have businesses where you may have one enterprise functioning, operational, and you diversify under the same ownership. What you do is you inform the Invest Dominica Authority, so we are cognizant of, because you are the same proprietor,
right,
you are the same owner. In that case, we don't consider it a disposal, but we are aware and we authorize the transfer or the use in another business.
Okay, very good. So how does the IDA and Customs collaborate? So let's say in terms of training and that sort of thing.
Well, we've alluded to some of the collaboration between Customs and Invest Dominica so far, but just to point out that Customs is integral in the whole business doing environment and support for enterprises, because that's the main port of entry, or they control the ports of entries. And the fiscal incentives, if we do not have the collaboration of Customs, because at Invest Dominica Authority, the government grants the fiscal incentive license through Invest Dominica Authority, but Customs really are the ones who does all the checks and balances to ensure that it complies, to ensure that nothing slips through the cracks, because there are certain items that are not allowed, whether or not you have a fiscal incentive license. These items are not allowed for duty-free, and there are certain regional agreements that are to be complied with, and the Customs Department, they are aware of it, so it's important that we liaise with them. You mentioned training. Invest Dominica Authority, what we try to do is biannually keep what we call an orientation seminar, where we have new entrants into the private sector. We collaborate with Customs, Social Security, Inland Revenue, the other agencies that are pertinent to the survival, and to ensure that the businesses are in line with their legal requirements, to apprise them of the procedures, what is required, what they must do to be compliant. And therefore we depend on Customs during those orientation seminar training. You've mentioned, and Mr. Coppell mentioned the data, which is important. Fiscal incentives isn't, we don't simply grant it, but we keep track as to the impact, the economic impact. And because you are exempted from the duties at the ports of entry, it is important that we liaise with Customs to track the impact of the fiscal incentive in terms of numbers. So we are aware that there's an economic benefit to doing it. It's not only done from the top of our heads. We appreciate that fiscal incentive does support their enterprises, and that is where Customs is important, because any misinformation or any slip on their part affects the output that we are supposed to have.
That's right.
And we monitor the end use of the concession, basically. So when we make certain observations that the concessions are not being utilized for what they were granted, then we take corrective actions.
So for instance, if I were to receive duty-free concessions on, let's say, something, and I'm not utilizing it the way I intended to, what actions would you take?
We basically will do, first and foremost, we will inform you officially, and we will give you the option of coming in. You can settle administratively with the Comptroller of Customs, or if not, if it's so entails that the next step, then we will go for the due process, legal process.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Can you explain the clearance process when one is a beneficiary of fiscal incentives?
Well, first of all, anyone who would like to access fiscal incentives, they would go through the necessary procedures at Invest Dominica Authority, fill out an application form with accompanying documents, business registration, business plan. If they're doing any physical structure development, we would ask for an approval from the physical planning division, the required work permits if it's a foreigner, the required licenses depending on the operations. And then that application is filled out. We process it on the client's behalf, submit it to the cabinet or an approval committee. The approval committee reviews applications for under 2 million, and the cabinet investment applications in excess of 2 million. Once that's done, an approval is received. If an approval is not received, then we also inform the client. But once the approval is received, then a license is prepared and provided to the client, which is copied to the Customs Department, Ministry of Finance, Inland Revenue, because all these agencies need to be aware that this particular person is authorized to import certain items duty-free, or the license may also contain a tax holiday, and that is dealt with at the Inland Revenue Department and not at the Customs. Therefore, those relevant agencies are copied on the license, and from there the client is expected to submit a list, we call it a master list, of all the items that they intend to import. We ensure that those items are in keeping with the categories approved on the concession license. Where the items don't fall within the categories, we inform the client, we remove them. Then that list is approved and vetted by the Ministry of Finance, then sent to the Fiscal Incentive Unit, where the vetting and so on takes place to ensure that the client imports what has been approved on the list, and they keep the checks. Because we encourage persons, but even before I mention, after the master list, because the items, the concession is granted over a period of time, the client may return with another list, which we call an addendum, basically adding items to what they've already submitted. It does not mean that you are only entitled to one set of items. You may add items once your license, what we call is once you are within the period of time that the license has been granted. And once the license is current, then you are entitled to that. And then the client proceed to their broker with their approved list and their license. And this is where the Fiscal Incentive Unit takes over.
Okay.
Yeah, so the officers at the Fiscal Incentive Unit, they will cross-check that the customs the customs codes being utilized, or the custom procedure codes, are the correct ones. Secondly, they will go through the list to ensure that if the items which are being declared are not on the master list, that we will inform the individual, the enterprise, or the organization, and the individuals will then have to pay what the applicable duties would be on these goods, or the enterprise, as Mr. Victor said, would have to seek an addendum.
Okay. In terms of the license, Mr. Victor, what's the duration of a license? Does it differ for different types of businesses?
Yeah, well, the duration is dependent on the investment level and the impact. There's an assessment that you do of the particular project. Because there are certain enterprises that receive fiscal incentive, and it's a one-time, in the sense that you speak to the client, you understand their need, and you evaluate on a case-by-case basis, okay? Depending on the nature of the development also, you may have phased developments, and we appreciate that the investment will be over a period of time. And logically, you would want to support over that period of time without the applicant having to return annually or at every phase. However, the law does provide that we don't exceed, for example, in the for the tax holiday. The Hotel Aid Act makes provision, and the Income Tax Act makes provision for a tax holiday of up to 20 years. However, the client may return for a tax holiday thereafter, but that's only dependent on whether the client is expanding or adding new rooms. It's not automatic. The Fiscal Incentives Act makes provision for 15 years to manufacturers, and it does not cater for a new slate of tax holiday. You understand? So there's a maximum, and therefore that impacts the concession, the exemptions from importation of the exemption from the payment of import duty or value-added tax. As I said, value-added tax stops once you would have commenced operations. Therefore, during the development phase, implementation phase, you may benefit from that. Then once you've started producing and selling, or once you've started selling your services, then that cuts up. So there are determinants to, and we are unable to say, well, oh, this is 1 year, this is 2 years. Administratively, we have procedures in place to determine how long any particular project gets based on its investment and its economic impact.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Stay tuned.
I believe in the natural order of things. I believe in the harmony of things. You know, in everything we do, we have to keep it natural. I've been doing farming for now over a decade. My day is very hectic, but I make it light, you know, because I enjoy what I do. I enjoy producing the best quality goods, and to make sure that the people that receive it, they receive the best that they can ever get. Right from the farm, everything that I grow, I process them back into the farm, so that the same things that grow in the farm is what protects the farm. Tourism is my business. You know, it's not just dealing with the foreigners that come in, but it's preparing those things that when they come, they can feel and taste the difference in coming to this exotic island. And it starts with the farmer, because we provide the things that they eat, that they taste, that they drink. I believe in my heart that it's my responsibility to provide quality. My name is Tony Alves, and tourism is my business.
Welcome back to Invest in You. Today we've been discussing the synergies between the Invest Dominica Authority and the Customs and Excise Division. Again, let me just introduce our guests again for those of you who are just tuning in. We have Patrickson Victor, Investor Services Officer at the Invest Dominica Authority to my far right, and Louis Copel, Officer in charge of the Fiscal Incentives Unit at the Customs and Excise Division. So guys, we've had a great conversation thus far. Can you tell me what the role of the IDA is in supporting the private sector in particular?
Yeah, well, primarily IDA supports the private sector. Okay, and everything we do is geared towards improving the environment, doing business environment, and supporting. We spoke earlier to the fiscal incentive unit, fiscal incentive packages and license that businesses can apply for and receive to support them, because the exemption of import duty, essentially, you are supporting the business, not directly within finance, which Invest Dominica Authority does not do. But the exemptions, it provides a huge support and helps with the capital investment, because those funds which otherwise you would have used to pay the value-added tax or the duties, you could use it to operate your enterprise. Besides, before we get to this point, IDA, we receive the clients and we facilitate the development of the enterprise. Persons may have an idea and they are not too clear as to what is required. And I mentioned earlier about the one-stop shop kind of scenario we try to create, where, and therefore IDA helps in the sense, person comes in, could have a discussion with us. And I must point out, it's not only for foreigners. Locals also can access the services of Invest Dominica Authority. So we review the business plan of the individual, and because we have a holistic idea as to how the market works, how the business environment operates, we are able to guide the individual in that procedure, through that procedure. Also, IDA helps to identify joint venture opportunities. We help to identify markets. We help to, because we conduct trade missions, investment promotion missions overseas, we interact with foreign business persons, and we are able to create linkages between our local business persons and those that we meet, because we appreciate that in order for any enterprise to develop, you should be able to at least export your product, which will help to fuel the development of your business.
I do have a question before you move forward. You mentioned something that I think is very important, that the IDA doesn't only offer services to foreign investors, they're also local investors. And I think this is a very important point to make, because I think that while the IDA is a great entity, a lot of locals don't always feel that the IDA represents them, or that they can even come to the IDA for services. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, we have a number, because what we do at IDA is we manage what we call a client portfolio, where everyone who accesses the service of IDA, we register them and we continue to work with them even after they would have received fiscal incentive. The aftercare process, where you follow up, you ensure that they are compliant. If they need training, they need some support, even financial support. If the client needs, we try to assist in identifying sources. Although we don't provide it directly, but a joint venture will allow you to receive a financial injection. We have memorandum of understanding with a few financial institutions, and therefore that allows us to support the presentation of a client's project, and the financial institution will review the project on its merit, however, in collaboration with Invest Dominica. The portfolio of clients that I mentioned earlier, we have a 80-20. 80% are locally owned enterprises and 20% are owned by foreigners. That means to say we service a sizable chunk of local businesses. So just to put it out there, that we do have local persons who access the services of Invest Dominica, but we want to encourage other persons to come in. And we do not discriminate in terms of, oh, it's just a small idea or it's a huge idea. We try to work with the person to develop, because small and micro enterprises also contribute to economic development. And it's important that we promote entrepreneurial and therefore we want to encourage persons to visit Invest Dominica Authority. We can have a discussion and see. Given if we are unable to satisfy all of the client's needs, we would direct them to the relevant department or agency that may provide that support that they want directly.
Another question just came to mind. So with the plethora of services that you offer to your clients or potential clients, is there a fee or a cost associated with that?
Well, earlier I mentioned that we are a statutory body and therefore there's no fee.
Right.
We have a number of persons coming and say, well, how much will this cost? How much do I owe, and so on. but it's paid for by the taxpayers, I must say. Well, there's a price to everything, but there's no direct fee to the client. Our services are offered because it's a government agency.
And I asked that question because I think that is a hindrance for many people. If they say I need to go to the IDA or I need assistance, but I don't have the money to pay for these kinds of services. So it's great that the public does know that for any business idea or that they may have, that they can come to the IDA for advice and direction.
Not only if they have a business idea, we have a number of enterprises that are functional, operational. They may be having challenges. Whether it's with marketing, whether it's financial, whether they need an upgrade, whether they need advice, accounting, they feel that my staff needs some kind of level of training. We are not saying that we provide all the services directly, but what we do is because of the network that we've created with all government agencies and even other private sector agencies that we are aware of that could support business development, then we are able to guide, and I think knowledge is power.
That's right.
And we meet a lot of persons come to the office and they say, I wish I had met you guys earlier, or I wish I had known, because you have the business persons out there and they have no clue as to where to go next. And this one-stop shop that we provide, essentially you sit and we make the necessary calls, we provide you, we follow up, we send you the emails with the information. And it is all in keeping with knowing that information is required on the part of the person to make an informed decision, and that helps with the business development. And we want to ensure that there's success by every business and continuity, because this in turn would lead to employment and of course greater economic development.
And also sustainable.
Right.
You want to ensure that whatever business you assist is able to sustain itself over time. Concessions, they primarily eliminate duties on imports. How does that impact the revenue of government?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we don't grant fiscal incentive without assessing it. And it is important because persons tend to think, well, we're exempting from all these duties, we don't allow them to pay the taxes. What is the benefit? Because the state is losing revenue.
Right.
And it's a fair argument, but it's a fair argument unless you are exposed to the data, unless you are exposed to the information. And annually we assess the fiscal incentive granted to enterprises through Invest Dominica Authority. Okay, so what we do is we track the impact and the revenue foregone by the state as a result of having granted exemption from payment of import duty, exemption from payment of value-added tax, exemption from payment of corporate income tax. We track that in collaboration with the customs and the Inland Revenue Department. And as such, what we've noticed is that every year from 2010, the revenue foregone is less than the impact of the enterprise. How do we assess the impact of the enterprise? Appreciate that once you would have supported a business to be established and help them with fiscal incentives, that enterprise makes an economic contribution. We mentioned earlier the other taxes that are paid. And also this enterprise employs persons who pays income tax. Okay? This enterprise collects VAT on behalf of the state if they are VAT registered. This enterprise employs persons who pay social security. But let us just stick to the customs, because we are here conducting this program with the customs unit and the impact from that angle only. What we notice is in 2013 to 2015, revenue foregone by the state, 4.5 on average million as a result, 4.5 million is as a result of granting fiscal incentives.
Wow.
Okay? However, on the flip side, when those enterprises would have been established, and keep in mind the fiscal incentive is for a period of time, when it would have expired, those enterprises continue to operate. And as such, they now are expected to pay the taxes. Okay? Also, I mentioned not every item is exempted. And as such, those supporting items for the business operation that is brought in, raw material, for example, commercial items, for example, they pay the taxes on those. And what we have is from 2012 to 2015, we have an average of 6.5 million being paid by those enterprises.
Wow.
Now that is only at the port of entry. And therefore we can clearly see in terms of numbers that it is beneficial to support those enterprises. Now one may argue, well, don't give it and we will get all. What Invest Dominica Authority does is we conduct surveys. And we've noticed that with the surveys we've conducted, persons are indicating that they would not have invested if the fiscal incentive was not available, or they would have invested much less. And once the person would have invested less, the operations would be smaller and they would have less need for raw material. They would employ fewer persons, which means there would be a smaller economic impact in terms of their business. So we can see that overall there's a net benefit to the state in terms of granting fiscal incentives.
That's right, that's right. I think, Mr. Kopal, I think this question is for you. Are fiscal incentives through the IDA the only concessions available to individuals or businesses?
No, these are not the only concessions available. We also offer concessions to returning residents, to movement of persons, people who have been out for a period of not less than 2 years and they are moving back home permanently, and also to students. But in order for the applicant to be granted this concession, they need to provide supporting correlative documentation. And because these concessions, they are privilege, it's not a right. And we need the people to understand you must go through the due process, and if you qualify, you will be granted that concession. Now, the returning residents and for the movement of persons, upon being granted that concession, there's a form which we call the FTI 102. We allow the people, it's a declaration that they sign it. It will be utilized when the custom broker prepares the documentation work prior to them paying, and the fiscal incentive unit will then release the items, and then they will proceed to get possession of the goods. We also have the FTI 104, which is signed by the persons who are returning residents for the vehicles which they will be granted. Now, for the vehicle aspect, upon the payment of the duties, they go through the necessary procedure. They will get an insurance cover note. They will proceed to the Inland Revenue Division where they will register a number. They will come back to us. They will sign a bond with the Office of the Comptroller of Customs, which stipulates the conditions under which the vehicle is to be kept and which are applicable at all times. And after that, we release the goods into their possession once they have understood and they have signed that documentation.
Okay. For somebody wanting to come into Dominica and possibly meet with Customs, where can they find the Customs Department?
The Customs and Excise Department is located at the Woodbridge Bayport at Fokole. And also, prior to that, if there's any need for making any contact, they can go to the Customs and Excise Division website. And they can ask any information, and we get back to them within the shortest period of time.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between Customs and DASPA in particular?
All right. DASPA is basically the custodians of the cargo. They maintain and operate the port, but Customs now is the revenue generating authority, and also we are the ones who do the agency duties. So the diaspora, we work hand in hand. But it's not a competition or anything. But there's a distinct difference
between the two. Okay. For those of you, for the general information, the website is www.customs.gov.dm, and you can go onto that website and find any information that you need regarding customs. Any last comments from you, Mr. Victor?
Yeah. First, let me say thanks again for having us.
Sure.
And just want to reiterate that Invest Dominica is here to serve the business public, mostly the private sector. And we want to encourage persons, no matter what difficulty you're going through, whether it's you're thinking on expanding, you are not clear, you're not informed as to what is required, where can you go, what you can do, they could contact us at the office, 4482045. Also, they could visit our website, investdominica.com, and a lot of information is provided there. And we are open. There's no requirement for an appointment. Persons could walk in, persons could call in, and we would best serve them.
Very good, very good. Any last comments from you, Mr. Coppell?
Basically that just again to reiterate to the people that they need to acquaint themselves with the procedures in place for the utilization of the concessions, whether it be the fiscal incentive or the other concessions which customs grants or administers. But I think that's it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for being here on behalf of the Invest Dominica Authority, and I want to thank you for tuning in today to Invest in You. We do hope that the program was able to provide answers to any of the questions that you may have had. I am Pearl Fontaine Butler. See you next time for another edition of Invest and You.